Welcome to EU Decoded, the podcast from the EPP Group in the European Parliament, and here we unpack what's happening in EU policymaking. And this week we're bringing you the latest from Strasbourg, where another plenary session just wrapped up. So let's dive into the highlights. This week marked a significant anniversary. 80 years since the end of World War II in Europe. A war that left our continent in ruins. A war that showed just how much damage hatred can cause. And a war that revealed the true face of human suffering. President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola, remembers the victims and the men who chose reconciliation over revenge in the aftermath of the war.
The names that line the corridors of our Parliament: Schuman and Adenauer, Spaak and de Gasperi, Churchill and Monnet. These were men who had lived through the war, who had buried brothers, lost friends and seen cities burn. And yet, they chose reconciliation over revenge. They chose to believe that former enemies could become partners, that cooperation was not a weakness but a necessity. And from their courage, a new Europe was born. A Europe that rejected the poison of the past and dared to build peace. And it is because of them that we stand here today in a parliament of nations, of former foes turned friends, united by a shared promise: never again.
Although for many, the 8th of May 1945 meant liberation, for millions in Central and Eastern Europe, it marked the beginning of Soviet occupation, and their freedom came many years later.
German Nazism was defeated 80 years ago, but imperial communism, left undefeated, has evolved into Russian fascism. Let's not repeat the mistakes of history. Russian fascism will not stop after gaining Ukrainian territories, just as Hitler did not stop after annexing Czechoslovakia.
This was MEP Raza Yuknevichiene, warning about lessons from history and underlining what the EPP Group has said numerous times: Putin will not stop after gaining Ukrainian territories. As Ukraine fights for its freedom, we must remember that only just peace means freedom. MEP Mikhail Gala also called out Russia for not learning the lessons of history and reiterated the EPP Group's support for Ukraine, not only during this war, but also on their path towards the EU membership.
While Germany and the Western democracies have learned the lessons of history, never again allowing an attack on a peaceful neighbor, Russia has not. That is why we stand with the victim of the aggression. That is why freedom and democracy must prevail again over the other empire of evil. We support Ukraine in their wish for a ceasefire and a just and sustainable peace. We support Ukraine in their wish to join the EU.
When we talk about peace in Ukraine, one thing must be clear. There can be no Russian dictate. The aggressor cannot be rewarded. The EPP Group stands firmly behind a just, lasting and comprehensive settlement, one that lets Ukraine decide its own future. The rest of the world also needs to think seriously about its future. Global trade has become one of the casualties of today's tense geopolitical climate. And this week, the European Parliament debated how the EU should respond to new US trade measures. Tariffs serve no one. They harm consumers on both sides of the Atlantic and weaken our joint economic strength. And that's why the EPP Group is calling for dialogue, not escalation. MEP Jürgen Warborn, EPP Group spokesman for international trade, highlighted 3 strategic priorities the EU needs to focus on: deepening the single market, expanding our global trade network beyond the US, and leading efforts to reform the World Trade Organization to defend a rules-based international trade system.
The current pause from the Trump administration is de facto a 25% tariff on EU steel, aluminium and automobiles, and a 10% tariff on almost all other goods. The Commission's decision to hold off on immediate retaliation is wise. De-escalation creates a space for dialogue. But let us be clear. Inaction cannot become our policy.
Well, trade plays a big role in a country's economic strength, but so does innovation. And let's face it, the global tech race is on, and everyone wants to come out on top. The European Commission has shown real ambition to boost innovation and close funding gaps. The EPP Group welcomes this push, especially the focus on strategic technologies like AI, clean tech and biotech, as well as the effort to simplify EU funding tools. But sidelining fundamental research, that would be a big mistake. MEP Eva Meidel also adds that research successes must be reflected in the final products.
But excellence in research must translate in products and services. This is why we need to ensure innovation doesn't stop in the lab. We must support startups, our leading startups and our leading innovators through various initiatives, through connecting mechanisms as well as funding, to bring great ideas to market and scale them effectively.
But to ensure any type of funding, we need to talk about the EU's long-term budget first. It has to reflect the scale of the challenges we're facing, and that means a bigger budget than last time. The EPP Group Vice Chair, Siegfried Muresan, says the budget needs to match the EU's new priorities, boosting economic competitiveness and strengthening defence. At the same time, we can't lose sight of the EU's traditional pillars, agriculture and cohesion.
We want a budget which is more flexible so that we can react to unexpected developments, and we also want a budget which is simpler. And simplification for us means make accessing EU funds easier for beneficiaries, for SMEs, for farmers, for entrepreneurs, for local communities.
When it comes to public finances, the EPP Group stands firm on its commitment to transparency and accountability. The group believes that any organisation receiving public money, be it government, agency or NGO, must be open to public scrutiny. Long before this became headline news, the group was already raising concerns about the lack of transparency in NGO funding. Well, now, even the European Commission has acknowledged that it funded some improper lobbying activities by the NGOs.
Wir haben doch eine ganze Menge von Arbeitsprogrammen gefunden, in denen ein Teil von Netzwerken...
MEP Monica Hohlmeier spoke on the need to increase transparency when it comes to financing NGOs. She noted a special report by the European Court of Auditors that has uncovered some deficiencies in this area. And that's why the EPP Group is calling on the Commission to fully investigate who may have been unduly influenced and, more importantly, how to prevent this in the future. Now, this was an important week also for the European car industry. Due to a fast-track procedure, the European Parliament decided to protect car manufacturers from disproportionate fines. Consequently, this protects European jobs and helps the industry to stay competitive on the global stage.
Wir wollen Industrie und Arbeitsplätze in Europa halten. Flexibilität ist daher
MEP Jens Giesecke says that this vote is critical for giving car manufacturers much-needed relief and the flexibility to meet their climate targets. He called it a first step to saving the European car industry. A recent power blackout left the Iberian Peninsula without electricity, mobile services and access to basic infrastructure. It's a wake-up call and a clear reminder of why we need to talk about the resilience of the EU's energy grid. The EPP Group Vice Chair Dolores Montserrat is calling on the Spanish government for answers. She says energy policy can't be based on sectarianism. There must be a reliable electricity supply, and we must make smart use of all available energy sources.
El año pasado, Red Eléctrica, el operador nacional, advirtió en su informe
MEP Montserrat noted how the national electricity operator warned that closing nuclear plants without interconnections and storage systems would weaken the grid, multiply incidents, and put supply and citizens at risk. Well, Portugal was also hit by the blackout, but compared to Spain had a rapid and effective action. However, the issue of energy infrastructure remains a serious topic.
A Península Ibérica, com apenas 3% de capacidade de interligação,
MEP Paulo Cunha warns that with only 3% interconnection capacity, the Iberian Peninsula is indeed an energy island. Achieving 15% interconnections by 2030 must be a clear priority, he says, to ensure energy independence from abroad. And one thing is clear, power outages like this one cannot happen again. And that brings us to the end of this episode. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to follow the EPP Group on social media for the latest updates. In our next episode, we'll be diving into global trade tensions. So until then, take care and goodbye.